In this video, we'll refute the critics' claim that Antiochus Epiphanes is the little horn in Daniel 7. Reminder to hit the subscribe button below and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date as new videos come out. And if you're interested in supporting this ministry, just go to justscripture.org and click on the support page. In parts 1 and 2 of our chapter 7 study, we have covered the things that Daniel has seen so far. In part 3, Daniel will receive clarification and additional insight into what those visions all entail. So far, we have seen how the four winds of heaven have stirred up the sea that brings up the four beasts. These beasts correspond to Nebuchadnezzar's statue of the four Gentile empires. But at the end of the fourth empire, the uncut stone smashes the statue in Daniel 2, while in Daniel 7 it spoke about the fourth beast being slain. Which then begged the question, who is the stone/slayer that launches God's kingdom on earth? We got our answer in Isaiah 66, as it was speaking about the same eschatological scene. In verse 15, it identifies the Lord as the one who does the slaying with a sword. And the catch to this is that the Hebrew word for Lord is Yahweh, who is the God of Israel. So, the uncut stone/slayer is Yahweh himself that destroys the fourth kingdom. But when we read Daniel 7:13, we see that there are two main characters in heaven that Daniel saw: the Ancient of Days on his Hot Wheels throne, and the Son of Man coming on clouds before him. Now, nobody is going to call into question that the Ancient of Days is Yahweh. But we also demonstrated that the Son of Man is also Yahweh as well. And the reason for this was the coming on clouds language that was spoken about him. Because all prior examples in the Old Testament say that it is God who comes riding on the clouds. So instead of thinking that the Son of Man is getting to borrow Dad's car this one time in the Old Testament, that we are to see these two figures as one and the same. Thus, we have two characters that Daniel would have recognized as Yahweh. But since the Old Testament is abundantly clear that there is only one God, that both the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man are the one Yahweh having the same essence, but are still distinct from one another in their personhood. Which now asks the question, which of these two personally does the slaying of the fourth beast? That answer comes to us pretty easily. We established that Daniel 7's Son of Man and Psalm 2's Son of God figure are the same person, as both are described as the ruler in God's kingdom. And our slayer is revealed in verse 9 of Psalm 2 that says, "Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel." So here, the Son of God is breaking them into pieces, while back in Daniel 2:44, it was the uncut stone who would dash them into pieces. So it is the Son of God who is the uncut stone, who is also the Son of Man, who is the Son of David, who is the Messianic King, who is the slain Lord, who collectively are the incarnate Yahweh who comes down from heaven, riding on the clouds, that destroys the fourth kingdom and sits to the right hand of the Ancient of Days, according to Psalm 110. You see, all we are doing is connecting the pieces together. And as we go, we eventually find a piece that connects them all together, and then we continue adding more pieces that make up the Old Testament mosaic of who the Messiah is to be. Verses 15 and 16. "I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit, in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto one of them that stood by, and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me, and made me know the interpretation of the things." So Daniel is struggling with all of this. He doesn't know what to make of certain things, and will ask about the confusing parts as he goes. He said that one of them told him the interpretation. It's not spelled out exactly who of the 100 million plus angels that did the interpretation, but a possibility is that it's Gabriel since he will be, interacting with Daniel in chapters 8 and 9. Verse 17. These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. One passing comment on the beasts here is that they are said to be coming out of the earth, which is clearly distinct from the four winds who came from heaven. I've seen critics try to connect the four winds with the leopard's four wings to promote their false four-empire scheme. Verse 18. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Without question, this is in reference to God's kingdom. But the word saints pops out at us. The saints are talking about human beings here and not angelic ones, because the same word was used before for the holy ones from heaven that passed judgment on Nebuchadnezzar. So a good way to understand what a saint is, and in the general sense, is one who remains loyal to Yahweh. Verse 19. Then I would know the true meaning of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, broke in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. So Daniel's curiosity is with the fourth beast, and not so much with the first three. The fourth is so different and dreadful to Daniel that he didn't have the ability to equate it with a known animal like before with the lion, the bear, and the leopard. The teeth of iron and nails of brass are good reasons why Daniel probably wasn't able to, connect it to anything recognizable. The brass, though, is interesting because it is the metal that was described with the third empire on the statue. Verse 20. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn had eyes, and a mouth that spoke very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. Now we see Daniel narrowing his focus onto the 11th little horn that replaces 3 of the kings. The 11th horn is said to be more stout than the others, meaning that he has a more imposing, ruthless nature to him than the other ones. Remember that this horn is attached to the devouring, trampling beast. And although we can assume that the other original 10 kings were probably pretty evil in themselves, that this 11th king will make them look like playful puppies comparatively. Verses 21 and 22. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given on behalf of the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints should possess the kingdom. So now we have a war on our hands, as the 11th horn is successfully attacking those loyal to God, which is why the Fourth Empire and its kings will be personally judged by him himself. Verse 23. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. The fourth kingdom is said to devour the whole earth. Now this might sound like, it's the whole globe, but this isn't the first time that Daniel has used this type of wording. Earlier, he spoke of God's kingdom filling the whole earth. Then he said that the Greek Empire would rule over all the earth. And then currently we have the fourth kingdom doing the same. But looking at the Greek Empire map, we see that they obviously did not rule over all the earth. And even the Roman Empire, whose peak was in 117 AD, didn't cover the whole earth as well. And we know that they never successfully defeated the Parthian Empire over the course of many centuries. So the only point here is that this phrase doesn't automatically mean the whole global earth as clearly as one would think when it's really used in reference to the Mediterranean world. Now on the other hand, this doesn't restrict God's kingdom to the Mediterranean world either. The text, the context, and what history records should always be our guide when interpreting these types of phrases. Because some critics will try to point to Luke 2:1 about Augustus' census going out throughout the whole world as a so-called heir in the New Testament, while the obvious context is that of the Roman Empire, and even many translations make note of that. verse 24. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. This only adds to our confirmation that the toes and horns correspond to one another, as both are representing 10 concurrent ruling kings just prior to God's kingdom being installed on earth. Now the rest of verse 24. And another 11th king shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. The last part about subduing 3 kings is intriguing. The Aramaic word here for subdue is shafal. It occurs 4 times in Daniel. The first time was with God bringing Nebuchadnezzar low, then Daniel telling Belshazzar that God granted his grandfather Nebuchadnezzar the ability to put down kings and nations, and that of Belshazzar not humbling himself in recognition of all that it is that God has done before this. And then we have our 11th current king here as well. Collectively, we see that this deals more with somebody losing their power rather than being killed. So, the 11th king's rise in power is done by overtaking 3 of the 10 kings. Verse 25. And the 11th king shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change the times and laws. And the saints shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. Quite a bit to unpack here. The first part, about speaking great words against God, shows his contempt that he will have for God. So the 11th king is not just ruthless in general, but seems to have a personal axe to grind with God. But not just with him, but also with those loyal to him. The wearing out of the saints is describing his constant harassment and oppression. So you could think that this king will appoint a Richard Dawkins type figure as the first secretary of harassment to those who put their trust and faith in God, but probably that his goal is to get people to recant on their faith. But here's where the details get really peculiar. It says that the 11th horn will try to change the times and laws. Times refers to scheduled appointed times like holidays. Daniel used the word 11 times before, and all of them dealt with an event that was predetermined to take place. So, does this refer to changing the calendar around? Not really, because of the changing of the laws that are tagged with it. This changing or altering of the times and laws is collectively an attack on God's law. The Mosaic Law didn't just contain the 10 Commandments and other ordinances, but also festivals and holy days that they were obligated to keep. And some other versions will, be a little more specific on this. And the last part to verse 25 said that the saints will be given into his hand. So the 11th king appears to be successful, but this is only in part because God is allowing for it to take place, which tells us that there is a greater purpose that God will bring about from it. And lastly, we see that the 11th king's oppression is fixed to a certain length of time with a time, times, and dividing of time. Time here can be more determined to a 1 calendar year. This was the same word used with Nebuchadnezzar's madness, but we talked about how it could possibly mean 7 years, while at the same time it could possibly be referred to 7 Babylonian seasons that would reduce it down to 3.5 years. But because it is used 3 times in a row here, that the best understanding of this is to think that 1 calendar year is implied. So, the first time is 1 year. Times is 2 years because the plural causes a doubling effect. And the dividing of time would be then a half a year. So, in the last 3.5 years, the 11th king will be subduing 3 kings, oppressing the saints, and trying to change, or likely outlaw, God's law. And at the end of those 3.5 years, the Son of Man will come down, riding on clouds, to slay the beast and the little horn, and usher in God's everlasting kingdom on earth. Now you've probably been wondering if these specific events with the 10 kings and the 11th king subduing 3 of them has occurred already in history. Good question to ask, but I'm going to answer that like a politician by giving an answer to a different question that is more important to us right now. Well, that seems kind of odd. Yeah, but you'll see why at the end of the video. And now our last 3 verses. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. Here the angel is interpreting verses 9 through 11 for Daniel. The judgment is the courtroom scene with the thrones being set up, with God surrounded by 100 million plus attendants that sentence the 4th beast to death, with the incarnate Yahweh coming down to slay the beast and the 11th horn, which they and those who align themselves with the beast instead of God will be given to the eternal flame. Verse 27. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. The fact that the angel tells Daniel that God's kingdom will cover everything under the whole heaven tells us that this kingdom will be a global kingdom. The 4th beast could be geographically isolated around the Mediterranean, but God's kingdom will encompass the entire planet that shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. This sounds like a special subgroup of the saints that are receiving the kingdom, but that really is not the case here. Because if you put your faith, trust, and loyalty with God, then you're getting in. Earlier in verse 18, it said that all of the saints will possess the kingdom forever and ever. And I like personally how the Berean Study Bible has put it, in that it will be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. So the last part is a descriptor of which people on earth that will receive it. And the angel's last piece of information was how everyone on earth will serve and obey him. But who's the him here? It's the Most High God that will be served. This phrase, though, is being used interchangeably with the Son of Man from verse 14 that said he is the one that we will serve. This is the author attributing deity nature to the Son of Man. In our last verse in chapter 7. This is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts terrified me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. Although Daniel got to see heaven, God, and the eventual ushering in of the kingdom, that the vision of the 4th beast was so terrifying to witness that Daniel didn't even share it with anyone else. So have these events already occurred? Well, I'll tell you when they definitely did not happen, and that was during the Maccabean revolt. What? Remember how the critics have to keep the Greek Empire as the 4th kingdom because of their late-date authorship conspiracy theory? But from our analysis, we've seen the clear failure of this scheme with what is actually described in Daniel and the total absurdity of creating an independent Median empire between Babylon and Persia. But for right now, the critics would have to account for the 10 kings and the 3 of them being subdued by the 11th king, and with the 3.5 years of oppression on God's people. The 11th horn in their scheme is to be identified with Antiochus Epiphanes. The build-up to him was that after Alexander's death in 323, that the empire then split up into 4 ruling territories, with the Diadochi Wars ensuing for the next 50 years. The 4 kingdoms were the Macedonian, Pergamum, Seleucid, and Ptolemaic, that were first headed up by Alexander's 4 lead generals. It is in the Seleucid Empire that Antiochus Epiphanes becomes the king in 175 through 163 BC. So, we're just going to start off by asking the basic question was, if there was 10 concurrent ruling kings during this time? And the short answer to that is, no. There were only 4 other kings at this time when Antiochus took the throne in 175. So the next question is, did he subdue 3 or any of these kings? And the answer is no, because Rome was the one who conquered the Macedonian Empire in 168, and both the kings from the other 2 kingdoms continued ruling past the time of Antiochus. And Antiochus' father, Seleucus IV, was assassinated by his own governmental official. It was after this that Antiochus seized the throne with the help of King Eumenes of Pergamum. So what does the critic do now? Well, first, they declare that the horns are only referring to the kings from the Seleucid Empire. And second, that the number 10 shouldn't be taken literally, because historically, Antiochus was the 8th king in the Seleucid Empire and not the 11th. So even though Daniel 7:24 explicitly said 10 kings, with the 11th coming up that subdues 3 of those kings, that this doesn't mean actually what it says. Now I imagine you're probably shaking your head a little bit at this point, but this is actually what they do. And what about those 3.5 years of oppression? Well, First Maccabees records that the desolation of the temple started on the 15th of Chislev in the 145th year till the 25th of Chislev in the 148th year. So at most, it was 3 years and 10 days of Antiochus' oppression on the Jews. And that is not close enough to the 3.5 years, because we will see that Daniel will give us the exact number of days at the end of the book. And what confirms First Maccabees for us is Josephus, who said that it was 3 years and not 3.5 years. So once again, when we simply look at the text and compare it to what is recorded in history, that the critical view fails over and over and over again. A reminder to hit the subscribe button below, turn on the notification bell, hit the like button, and leave a comment. And don't forget to visit us at justscripture.org. But in the meantime, stay salty.